Here we go again. Today we're back with another mock draft on the channel. We're drafting this week. We're drafting after Thursday Night Football. So I'm gonna be making a couple trades this time. Now pick one and pick two. Tennessee and the Giants. I think both are in pretty favorable trade down spots. With whether it's with Cleveland or the Jets, maybe Arizona. There's a couple other teams in here that could make sense for them to move up in the draft. So, without further ado, let's get started with my first trade. Now, with Tennessee, I'm going to be trading with the New York Jets. I think this makes more sense. More than, because, the Giants and Jets probably wouldn't want to trade with each other in all reality. So, we're going to start off here with Tennessee. Now, this makes sense for Tennessee. They're super early into the rebuild, so they're going to want to be getting, as much value as they can. They say it's too much. Well, okay, there we go. See? Takes a lot there. Now, Tennessee, if they stay at that pick, I do think they'd take Arvell Reese or Ruben Bain. I've been big on Reese mainly, but I think this is a good spot where they get value. They trade down. Somebody gets a quarterback. Their quarterback of the future, hopefully. And I think the best one here, and I think the team to do it is the Jets, as they do have the most assets available. They have three first and second rounders this year, and then 3 next year as well. So it just makes a lot of sense. Obviously, they did that Quinnen Williams trade and the Sauce Gardner trade. So we're going to be going with Fernando Mendoza, who, as I say, I really like. I mean, I keep raving about him. He's got everything you look for in a quarterback. He's just got the IQ, just the way he talks about the game. It's just reminding me of, reminding me of Andrew Luck, right? And that's kind of the comparison that keeps being brought up with him consistently. Now, pick 2 with the Giants. I'm going to be trading down with the Cleveland Browns. Now, I think the Browns could stay there, but I do really think they're going to try and get a quarterback. It just makes a ton of sense. I think the Giants would be a good team to do it. Again, the Giants aren't moving that far down, so they're able to still get one of the top players on the board. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to be taking, one of Downs or Tyson at 2, right? So, now with the Browns here, we're going to be taking another quarterback. And I think the one here that I'm going to go with is Ty Simpson. I think he makes the most sense there. I think he's more pro-ready. And, they need to add some things for him. He's a very good passer, but, that left tackle needs an upgrade. Wide receiver needs an upgrade. There's things to do, but I think he's super pro-ready. And I think, that defense is legit, so they could definitely make some noise next year if he's good. But, it's the Browns after all, so they'll probably fuck it up. Now, pick number 3. New Orleans. I think New Orleans is probably going to win a couple more games. Kind of where I'm at with New Orleans, I think they're going to take an edge rusher. I've been back and forth a lot on this, but I like how Tyler Chuck's playing. Last week he made some really nice throws. I know they lose, he makes some mistakes, but it's a growing pain. He's 4th or 5th start. He's got to adjust. You got to give him a chance. I think they're going to give him until next season, and I think, they're going to take an edge rusher, and I think they're going to take Arvell Reese. So, now with the Raiders, I keep saying Dante Moore is a perfect fit for them, and I think this would be perfect. Pete Carroll's job depends on who they draft here, and I think that's who they go with. Now, with the Giants, with all this shit with Abdul Carter, I do think the Giants are going to take an edge rusher. Brian Burns is not very young. I think he's right around 29, 30. I think edge rusher still makes a lot of sense. I do think Caleb Downs is definitely in the picture. But, even Tyson definitely in the picture. But I do think the Giants are going to take Ruben Bain Maybe they move up Abdul Carter. You never know. You can't really tell right now. But just everything that's going on in that organization with him, with the GM, with the DC, all this stuff that keeps coming out. It's just not. It's not a good sign. And I think they might take an edge rusher. And I'm going to predict that here. Washington. Now you could predict a couple different things because they do need a lot of different things. But I do think Caleb Downs would be really, really good. I do think Tyson is perfect for them too. You could go Tyson, you could go Tate. I mean, Falk's definitely in the picture there, but at 6, I think the pick is Caleb Downs. They really need a safety. The safety position, you could see that last week where against Denver. Obviously, I haven't watched a lot of Commanders games, but you know, the safety position just not. It's just not great. They've had injuries all season, but I think Caleb Downs. I keep saying he's a great leader. He could play basically anywhere, and he's a home run pick at 6. So now Tennessee's in a perfect spot. If they trade down, they get a receiver. They look like geniuses because they got a ton of draft capital. They'll probably get another first or two. They're probably not going to do that in all reality, but they need a receiver. One, I think Tyson or Tate, either one you go with, is perfect for your young quarterback. I do think they need to draft offensive line or target that in free agency, but for now, we're going to go with Jordan Tyson, who I think is the best receiver in the class by just a little bit. He's just the better player all around, in my opinion. So, now Arizona at pick number 8. We're only through 8 here. We're only 2-8 here. So, now, if we take a look at their needs, offensive tackle, quarterback's not in play anymore here. I've had Love in there for them, but I do think offensive line would be really beneficial. I know they say wide receiver, but that right tackle spot has kind of plagued them all year. I do really, there's a couple different spots for Love as well. Before I continue here, Love, Arizona, Minnesota, not Miami, sorry, Dallas, never know with Devontae. They could, he's only on a 1-year deal after all. So, you don't know what's going to happen there. And then the big one is Kansas City. And then you just keep going down. There's a couple more teams in there. But I really do think they could take that. They kind of, they could take best available here with Falk, but I think, they're going to go. I think Jeremiah Love's the pick here. I think he's the best running back by a bit in this class. I think you just have to get that run game. Trey Benson barely played this year. James Conner was hurt. The run game just wasn't there this year. I like Bam Knight, but he's not an RB1 in all reality. He might be better than Tony Pollard, but he's not that good. So, or he isn't good in general. Now with the Rams. Now the Rams, they really need an offensive tackle. It's kind of been their problem all year. I keep saying this. It's kind of a boring pick, unfortunately. Now, Tate's definitely in play. Peter Woods even. Delane, I don't rule out. You just got to take the offensive lineman, I think. It's like I said, it's boring. It's not, it's not the pick you want as a fan, but sometimes you just need to do that. Now, with the Bengals, I've had Peter Woods there a bunch for them. Now, Falk makes a ton of sense with how bad Shamar Stewart is. He just doesn't look like a good player. Hendrickson's on an expiring contract. They're probably going to try and tag him. I don't know what their plan is. I think they're going to re-roll here and take Falk. Now, Minnesota, Mansour Delane, definitely the big one here. Not linebacker here. Running back, safety, D-line. Now, and I do really like Peter Woods here. They signed, I believe it's Jonathan Allen. He really hasn't had a good year, unfortunately, and he got a bunch of money. And I think Peter Woods makes sense for Brian Flores' defense. I think that's been one of the weak points. I think Delane makes a lot of sense, but I think Peter Woods is the better player here to take, and I think that's what they would do. Now, moving on to Miami. Miami, I don't think they're going to take an offensive lineman. I do think corner makes a ton of sense, but I also do think, Tate himself is a perfect player for them to draft. I think this is the pick, and that's who I'm gonna go with. He he is just a very very talented player. His struggles mainly yards after yards after the catch basically. But he just has an incredible ability to catch the football at all times. Um, and he would fit really nice with Jalen Waddle, considering Tyreek Hill's future's in question, even Jalen Waddle's future's in question. Whatever quarterback you want to put there, long term, you need a wide receiver one. I think Tate would be perfect. So, yes. Now Dallas, I'm not even gonna think about it. It's Mansour Delane because of how bad their corners are. Bland, I don't know how he got that contract. He looked absolutely horrendous. Um, Genuinely. Yeah, I really don't get that one. He got 4 year, 94 mil. He got absolutely fried again. Diggs has been hurt. They just haven't had anything good in their secondary. I think Mansour Delane's just the easy homer pick. Um, Moving on to Kansas City. Now, Kansas City, I've had, a couple different guys. Now, the Chiefs have a problem at two positions here, long term. Offensive line, tight end. Kelsey, we don't know. I think, the pick here is probably Mwaga, just because, Josh Simmons been hurt. He's been inconsistent. Jawan Taylor's been shit, really, since they got him. I think, Mwaga's just a perfect pick. I think Sadiq makes a ton of sense, and I think they really could take him. But unfortunately, I don't know, what's going to happen with Kelsey, basically. And that's kind of just what's throwing me off on this selection here. So, now with the Steelers, I don't think Adam Thielen's going to solve their problem at receiver. They have a clear need there. A couple other positions could help. I'm sure they would rather go corner than receiver just because, knowing Mike Tomlin, right? Basically, that's kind of what he likes to prioritize. Just, you know, always, he doesn't go for the player he should take. Like Sadiq makes sense here too. They need a pass catcher regardless. I know the quarterback's definitely in question, but you need a pass catcher, man. Whoever you put back there, like the same thing with Miami. Whoever's back at quarterback, it doesn't matter. You need some pass catchers on the offense besides DK Metcalf. Jonnu Smith is okay. He was really good, as a screen player last year with Miami. He's not the same guy this year with how they're using him. They don't even have a wide receiver too. I mean, Roman Wilson's just not good. I don't think he'll be on a roster, in another year. So I'm gonna just say Makai Lemon just makes a ton of sense here in all reality. And I think that's what they'd do. Which I do think would actually mess up what the Panthers need, kinda. But I do think the Panthers would take David Bailey. Now, the Panthers' edge rush has really just struggled this year. I know they kind of need help at the secondary. Obviously, J.C. Horn's been really good, but besides him, they need some upgrades. Sadiq kind of in play. I think receivers more likely. Like I keep saying, if you want to give Bryce Young the time and you give him the weapons, right? That's kind of what you just need to do. And I hope they do take another guy because Legette's terrible and Coker is just not good. So now with the Texans, the Texans' offensive line is actually starting to look a little bit better, which is funny. I don't know if it's Davis Mills or C.J. Stroud, whatever the hell. I still think they're going to take one. It doesn't really affect my opinion on that one. Proctor is the best guy available. I know Lomu's down there. Yane, but I think Proctor's the best guy there. And I think they need to just protect the quarterback in all reality. The defense is really good. Obviously you can add in The linebacking core, Sonny Styles would definitely be a good pick, but corner doesn't make a lot of sense. Sadiq, they don't need a pass catcher in all reality. I don't think that's a huge problem for them. So now for the Lions, I think the pick here would be Jermod McCoy. They've really struggled with their secondary this year. TJ Reed has been hurt a lot. He's had a hamstring injury. Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch at safety have been hurt. Terrion Arnold's been hurt. I mean, you need somebody new there, and I think Jermod McCoy would be perfect, honestly, and I think that would be the pick here. Um, they kind of just need help on defense, whether it's edge rusher or corner. Either way, that's what you got to do. That's who you got to take, really. Now Baltimore. Now it makes it a lot easier for Baltimore here after they re-sign Mark Andrews, because who's they have a tight end locked up long term, because you could really think about the idea of them taking Sadiq in all reality. But the pick here is T.J. Parker. Now they really need edge rusher. They have one of the worst defenses rushing the football this season, and I think T.J. Parker would be good. I know he's had a rough year, but he had a nice last game of the season, and I think he'll bounce back. He'll probably have a good pro day and be a first round pick. So now Tampa, I think Sadiq's just a home run pick here. Sonny Styles definitely in play. Terrell definitely in play too. But, you need another weapon for Baker. You need somebody else, long term. Egbuka, Evans, Godwin, you don't know what's there, right? Sterling Shepard, Tyus Johnson, right? Come on. You need a big guy, a big player. Kate Otten is a serviceable tight end, but he's not good. He's not, he's just as average as it gets, right? They had, like, Austin Safarian Jenkins. He's a little bit better. Sadiq is just an elite talent. He would have been, a first-round tight end last year, even too, with Warren and Loveland. And he's pretty close to Warren. I think, Loveland's definitely a little tier, like, it'd be like Warren, Sadiq, Loveland, basically. So, yeah. Now the Bills, linebackers definitely play. Corner, I don't think they're going to take another one. I think the pick here, every time, I'm going to project Denzel Boston. You want to win a Super Bowl, help your quarterback, please. Simple. Simple as that. So, that's what you just got to do, right? Now for Philly, they have a couple needs: edge, receiver, offensive line. I really do think Ione here would be a really good pick for them. Since Becton left, they've really had a lot of problems there. But I also do think, Terrell, I mean, corner edge rushers is what it lists as their big needs. I think Ione or Howell is definitely the play. It's hard to predict, if you're going to take an inside offensive lineman, but I think, running the football has been a struggle because of the offensive line, and I think they're going to get a new guy here. You got to help Barkley, Hurts, whoever the hell else, right? Tank Bigsby, right? So now the Jets. Obviously, we had the Jets with Mendoza before. That's also a trade down spot for Philly in all reality. So the Jets here, they have a couple different needs here: corner, safety, linebacker. A lot of these guys are in play. Obviously, Terrell would be really good. Obviously, you just traded Sauce Gardner, taking, a corner with this pick. Terrell is an excellent one. I was on Twitter earlier looking at some of this guy's, highlights, and wow. I was amazed. He is really, really good. I think this is a homer pick. I think this is perfect for Aaron Glenn. Him or Sonny Styles would be perfect with Aaron Glenn. So, now, 49ers, I know it's boring, but they really do need offensive line help. And with Trent Williams, probably retiring this year, I'm going to say, I think they got to take a tackle. Now with the Chargers, edge rusher, offensive line, offensive tackle. They don't really need that. Safety, QB, like okay. So yeah, they're gonna say I should take Sellers perhaps. I do think Howell makes a ton of sense, just because with Khalil Mack being old, Bosa left, um, you really need some help right there, and I think he'd be perfect. Now with Cleveland, obviously, we took Ty Simpson at 2. Maybe it's a bit of a reach. If we look here, offensive tackle, it's a World definitely close, but I don't think he's there. I think wide receivers a play here, and I think they're going to take Chris Bell. They need a wide receiver 1. I think you got to take a guy he's just really good. You know, um, he is he's very quick for a bigger receiver, and it's just actually watching him. If you take time to watch him, he's really, I mean, he moves just unbelievably, really. He's just like a bigger sized receiver, and he's just super, super quick. I think he'd be really good there. And obviously, getting him with the first round, quarterback is perfect. So now Dallas, again, Dallas's big needs, basically the offensive line, basically the defense. The offensive line is what I meant to say. The offensive line is really good. Jerry Jones, every year he's just so good at drafting offensive line. They need an edge rusher. I'm not ruling this out, but I think Sonny Styles fallen a little too far here. I think he'd be perfect. They kind of need, that Sean Lee, Leighton Vander Esch, linebacker, right? Why not another, Jerry Jones clearly likes his white linebackers, so. Now, Seattle, corner, receiver, edge. I don't rule out receiver. I just don't see it. I think they have bigger needs, and I think, I mean, they want, linebacker here, and they suggest that. I think Cissay's good. I think Colton Hood's good. I think Colton Hood's probably more likely, but he's also fallen down the boards a little bit. Cissay's definitely a big riser this year. He's just had a really, really good year in general. So now we have the Rams at their own pick. They need a corner as well, which is funny. Edge rusher in play. I don't think they need it as much. I think corner is perfect. C.J. Allen maybe, but you never know. Now Denver, we do really need a linebacker. Drew Sanders, just second round pick, really can't stay on the field, unfortunately. It just really hasn't played much. I've had Conception here a lot, but I do really think a linebacker makes sense for us. Now it's C.J. Allen, Anthony Hill. I'd rather have Anthony Hill. I think Allen is also really good. I'm just gonna go with him, and I think right here it's Matayo Ugla Jehi. Best I can pronounce that. They need an edge rusher clear as day. They do need a defensive lineman. They do need Anthony Hill as well. The linebacker core has been hurt all year. But I think they make sense. And now, the Pats, my last pick. I'm going to go with Conception. I've had the Pats and the Broncos mocked with receivers a lot, and I think Conception is arguably the 4th best in this class. He just he's just such a good player. He transferred from NC State this past year. He's just had such a nice year, and he's just such a good deep ball catcher, and he really gets yards after the catch a lot too. So I think he could arguably be the 4th best receiver over Boston. I know I have Bell in there too, but I think those 3 are really close, and I think it's the same with the top 3. But this is a very good receiver class, so, as always, let me know what you think. We got a couple trades in here. I do think it's really realistic for the Jets. Maybe the Raiders trade up too, but I think the Browns are pretty likely too. Maybe Arizona even. So, yeah, feel free to crucify me, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace out.